Hello there, microphone. Hello. Hello. Hello, microphone test for the live stream. Testing microphone.
Hello.
All right, sit down, sit down, sit down. We got work to do here.
Hello, everybody. Thank you all for being here. As you can imagine, this took a lot of work. So I just want to give a big thank you to the senator staff, to our own police department, our fire department, town staff, if you don't know me, I'm Mayor Sherry Cantor, and I just have to give you the fire inspector told me if there is an emergency, there are exits in the back, on the side, on the side. Walk slowly and safely if, God forbid, there's an emergency. All right. I also want to recognize some people in the audience. We have our state rep, Derek Slapp, in the audience. We have our Attorney General, George Jepson, Commissioner Kevin Sullivan. Nothing could happen in this town without our town clerk, Essie LeBreau. Deputy Mayor Leon Davidoff, Ben Winograd, Councilor Beth Kerrigan, Councilor Dallas Dodge, Town Councilor, and Andy Fleischman could not be here at a death in the family, but I think that's it. If I missed you, I apologize, because everybody wants to hear from the senator, not from me. But I just want to say that this is what civic engagement looks like, right? We need to make sure we are informed by facts, right? We need to be aware and active and focused on the issues. The citizens of this community are hungry to have the senator listen to us and for us to listen to him. So I want you to be respectful when you speak to each other and to all of the people in the room. And I'm so grateful for you being here and to have this opportunity for the senator. This senator works really hard for us. I have known him for a long time. I had the amazing opportunity to sit in classrooms standing classrooms with you and teach government classes to our high school students about how important it is to be engaged and informed. He has been so committed to so many issues, and they're increasingly important and increasingly critical. But comprehensive mental health care, affordable and accessible health care, education, college affordability, common sense gun safety, including a 15-hour filibuster on the Senate floor. Job creation, Buy American initiative, smart international diplomacy, and international human rights. So he just returned from a national security conference in Germany. There are amazing, pressing issues with so much at stake. Senator Murphy, we can only imagine how busy you are, and we are so happy to have you with us and grateful to have the opportunity to welcome you back to West Hartford and to hear you and to support you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Kelly. Thank you. All right. So in my first term in Congress, we were presented with a choice. It was the summer of 2009, and the healthcare debate was lighting up the national airwaves, and Democrats had to decide whether they were going to go out and do town halls or whether they were going to hide and try to avoid the tumult and the controversy that was enveloping the nation. I decided to do town halls. I did I think a half dozen of them over the course of the summer break. And at the biggest of them, I had about this number of people, 750, who were there to protest largely my support for the Affordable Care Act. And this is better. So this is better. I want to thank Sherry, Mayor Cantor, and all of the folks here in West Hartford, in particular the police department who made this possible. You got here early and you've been inside, so you might not know what's happening outside, but there are probably 500 people lining the halls of this building right now. Wait. That's 500 people lining the halls inside. There's another 1,000 outside this building right now. So, and I was only late because I tried to spend a little bit of time saying thank you to every single person who came here and didn't get a seat inside. I want to thank both Kevin Sullivan and George Jepson in particular for being such great statewide leaders. Little known fact, they were the Senate Majority Leader and Senate President in the state Senate when they gave me my first real job in politics when I was 22 years old. And so they probably had no idea what they set off and began back in 1997. But here's my simple message for you today, and I want to spend most of the time taking your questions and taking your comments. There is no fear, there is no anxiety, there's no sadness that you feel today about the direction of this country that cannot be cured by political action, right? 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 Nothing, there is nothing that is inevitable, right? There is nothing that is impossible, but only if you understand how grave the stakes are right now, right? The legend says this. The legend says that upon the completion of the Constitutional Convention, Benjamin Franklin walked out to the steps of Independence Hall, and a young man was waiting for him. And he said, "Mr. Franklin, what do we have? A monarchy or a republic?" And the legend holds that Benjamin Franklin looked at the young boy and said, "You have a republic if you can keep it," right? And so don't assume that what we have is inevitable. Don't assume that democracy is natural, right? Over the course of human history, less than 1% of global citizens have lived under a democracy, have been able to determine for themselves, right, how the order of their world and their community is formed. And democracies meet these tests every now and again, where we are asked whether we are recommitted to this bold, innovative experiment. And this is one of those moments, right? We're going to talk tonight about these specific, dangerous, and reckless policies that the Trump administration has undertaken, trying to divide ourselves against each other. But we also have to talk about the real threats to democratic norms that are being presented today by a president who wants to recast the story of America, right? A story of a country that brought in people from all different ways of life, who prided ourselves as being a home for those who were fleeing persecution and terror and torture. A president who calls the free press for 240 years, a pillar of American democracy, the enemy of the people. This isn't just about the danger that is presented to our individual lives, it's really the danger that's presented to our way of life, democracy itself. And so, boy, I mean, it just lifts me up to see the response that has happened over the last 30 days, to see thousands of people gathered here in West Hartford on barely a moment's notice. And I want to let you know that it's working. I know it might not feel that way, right? Because it feels like every day there's another gut punch, right? Today we receive word of this new immigration plan that President Trump has designed to deport millions of people who are here without documentation. But let me just give you an example as to what I mean. When I was sworn into this new Congress, or I guess when my colleagues were sworn in January, Republicans were talking about repealing the Affordable Care Act and not replacing it with anything, right? So their initial plan was to repeal the Affordable Care Act, maybe postpone the effective date for 4 years, 3 years, 2 years, and then work on the replacement in between. Well, there was a tempest of political action that occurred. They were flooded with phone calls. That's when the rallies began to start all around the country. And Republicans very quickly amended their initial proposal. They said, okay, we do remember that we said we were going to repeal it and replace it. So now we're going to repeal it and replace it. Well, people said, well, wait a second. What are you going to replace it with, right? My health care is at stake. This is life or death for me. And the phone calls continued and the rallies continued. And Republicans said, okay, repeal and replace will happen at the same time, and we'll replace it with something that's just as good as the Affordable Care Act. It'll have the same number of people that are covered. We'll keep the insurance protections. And the rallies and the phone calls, they didn't stop. And Republicans figured out pretty quickly that, well, you know, you couldn't really do all that. You couldn't keep all those promises if you were going to repeal the law that did all of those things, that had all of those promises and protections. And so in the last 2 weeks, Republicans have been talking about repairing the Affordable Care Act, right? They're talking about just fixing the things that aren't working, right? That's happened over a very short, 7-week period of time. And if you saw the leaked audio from the Republican retreat, you saw, right, them talking in real time about what people are doing in this country, about this rising up that has happened. And the response is that their policy is changing in real time. I know it doesn't feel that way, because it does feel like every day there's just another gut punch to a sense of who we are and who we thought we always have been. But I am watching this play out in a way that does leave me with a feeling of optimism about what we can do if we keep this up. And so I want you to understand the stakes of what we are presented with today. It is about policy, but it's also about the underlying way that we order ourselves as a society. I want you to know that what keeps me up at night is that people's anger and their passion will dissipate over time, and that it won't continue. And I want you to know that I am in this with every ounce of my being. I am... And I don't have a background in politics. I don't come from a political family. My father calls this the recessive gene in our family that causes me to want to be involved in public service. But my mom grew up poor in New Britain, Connecticut. She lived in the housing project. She was the first woman in her family to go to college. And she just taught me growing up that I better not take for granted the economic security that I enjoyed growing up down the street in Wethersfield, Connecticut. And the only reason that she made it was because her community wrapped its arms around her with love and support. And guess what? With specific programming, right? Public housing, Pell Grants, that allowed her to do things that she would have never been able to do without them. And she just told me that whatever I did, I just had to lead my life in some way that gave little girls like her, who are growing up in other housing developments all across this country, some modicum of the same shot that she did. And so I feel at some level like I'm the luckiest guy in the world that you've given me the opportunity to be one of Connecticut's 2 United States senators, and at a moment where some fundamental fulcrum decisions are being made about where this country is headed, that I get to be in the fight. I know that we're not going to agree on everything here today. You're probably not going to like some of the answers that I'm going to give. I'm not going to line up with everything that you think that I should be doing. But this is an iterative process, right? Democracy is about your elected officials telling you what they believe in, but then being willing to learn, right? Being able to respond to the place that their constituents are. That's what this is about, right? That's what town halls are about. That's what being in constant touch with your constituents are about. And there are a lot of my colleagues who aren't doing this, right? There are a lot of my Democratic colleagues, frankly, who didn't do this back in 2009. But imagine a candidate for the United States Senate running for office and declaring to their constituents that when times got really tough, when you really got crosswise with the things that I was doing, I promised you that I will hide, right? Imagine, right? No one would say that. No one would say that because it runs contrary to every idea about representational democracy. And so I will try to do this as much as and often as I can in as many different forums as I can because ultimately I believe that I get better as a public servant if I'm constantly asking you questions about how I'm doing. So I want to talk about everything tonight. I want to talk about the Affordable Care Act. I want to talk about the immigration ban. I want to talk about our standing in the world. I want to cover it all, and I'm going to allow you to lead me there. So we have microphones at either end. I would ask that if you have a question that you line up in front of the microphones, and I'm going to ask, we have one over there as well, okay? I would ask that you ask a question, that you keep it as short as possible, and I will try to keep my answers as short as possible so that we can get through as many of these as we can in a short period of time. I will stay for as long as the town hall staff here allow me to stay, but if you keep your questions short or your comments short and I keep my responses short, we'll be able to get through as many of these as possible. Maybe say your name and the town that you're from, and then shoot. So.
Hi, thank you.
Can you not hear me well enough? All right, let me just move this up a little bit so you can hear me better. All right, I will talk louder too. Okay, go ahead.
Hi, thank you. My name is Madeline Fitzgerald, and I'm a high school student from Hebron. I guess my question is that I think as Americans we're often taught that the kinds of tyrannies that have happened in other countries can't happen here because our Constitution is so well crafted and our checks and balances are so strong. However, when the president delegitimizes important parts of our democracy and delegitimizes the court system and the Fourth Estate, and a sizable portion of the country will just agree with him regardless, how can we be sure that those checks and balances are going to help us? And what will you do, what can you do as our senator, and what can we do as citizens to preserve the American democracy?
Yeah, well, great question. I love that we started with a high school student. Thank you very much for your activism. It gives me faith that we can conquer some of these challenges. But let's be honest about what President Trump is trying to do, right? This isn't just somebody who gets angry in the middle of the night and decides to tweet out an assault on the press. This is a deliberate campaign to try to delegitimize those institutions that could tell the truth about what he is doing, right? He is trying to take away power from people who could tell the real story about the damaging nature of the policies that he's pursuing and the dysfunction that exists inside the White House today. And so there's no clear answer here, right, about how we respond, because we've never been presented with this threat before. A lot of it is on us, right? So we have to stand up collectively as political leaders. I have to challenge my Republican colleagues in Congress to call this behavior out, to make this a nonpartisan issue. And I think you have got to sort of, again, reinvest in some of the basic civic education that we took for granted, right? As high school students, you've got to have forums by which you can talk to your friends and your peers about the value of a free press, about the fact that there is such thing as objective truth, right? It's not just all in the eye of the beholder. And we've got to start sort of convening these community conversations in a way that we haven't in a really long time. So it's incumbent upon us to recruit our Republican colleagues to stand up. I spent the weekend with John McCain and Lindsey Graham, and you probably saw the strong statements that they made. I won't take credit for that, but I do spend a lot of time talking to Republicans about this. And then we've got to do this at the local level, and we've got to stand up for our local media outlets when they're being attacked at the local level as well. So.
Hi, my name's Valerie Horsley. I'm from Action Together, Connecticut, and I live in New Haven, Connecticut, and I'm worried about Russia. I spent too much time as a young child in the hallways of my school, worried that they were going to bomb us. And I just want to understand if you could explain your meeting with Lindsey Graham and John McCain, maybe could inform us on whether there will be a select committee, and if you can admit to this group that you will only stand for a select committee that will investigate whether the Trump administration was working with Russia and is still working with Russia.
Yeah, great. Thank you for your. So yes, as you know, I have been one of the most vocal proponents of establishing an independent select committee that is going to investigate the ties between the Trump campaign and Russia to come to some definitive conclusion as to the scope of their interference with the U.S. election. I want the Intelligence Committee investigation to be as real and as robust as possible, but that happens behind closed doors, right? It is almost impossible to declassify the information that is gleaned through an Intelligence Committee investigation. That's happening right now, both in the House Intelligence Committee and in the Senate Intelligence Committee, but it's not good enough. Ultimately, Russia is not going to pay a price if all of their misdeeds are kept behind closed doors. And so we are advocating for a select committee or for an independent committee that it isn't. Some of the information it takes in will probably have to remain classified, but its prejudice should be about holding this investigation out in the open. But let's be honest, we already know enough, right? I mean, we don't need any more facts about their interference in the election in order to make a decision to sanction Russia for their behavior. And having just come from Europe, let me tell you, they are on the march in France, in Germany, throughout the Balkans, trying to repeat the same success that they had here in the United States. And if they feel no pushback from us beyond what the Obama administration did on their way out, then they are going to repeat that behavior over and over and over again. I'm going to tell you, it is increasingly hard to explain Trump's positioning on Russia through any existing theory of international relations, right? I mean, I don't want to believe the worst, but we owe it to ourselves in this country to get to the bottom of this and get to the bottom of it fast.
Thank you so much. I want to start with that. Eleni DeGraw, Avon, Connecticut. I'm one of the founders of Forward Connecticut. I look around and I see all of these wonderful...
Speak loudly right into the mic.
Wonderful co-founder of Forward Connecticut. I look around, I see all our wonderful grassroots organizations. There's many of us who were crying on our couches the day after and immediately got into community organizing. For those of us who have stepped into leadership positions, what we need to know from you is how, you're supporting us. How do we best support you? It's not, we hear different things: postcards, petitions, marches, phone calls. We can't call, senators and congressmen in other states, even though they sit on committees that matter to us and that are really affecting what's happening. So how do we best help you to move forward?
Yeah. So thank you. And thank you, thank you to everyone here who has participated in these innumerable, powerful grassroots organizations. Forward Connecticut is a great example of the groups that have sprung up since the election. Again, it gives me faith and power to soldier on. I wanted to be just a little careful about how I answer this question because this is not a political meeting, right? So I can give you a sort of answer in an electoral sense, but this is probably not the place to do it. First of all, don't think that there isn't tremendous value in contacting my office, and for several reasons. One, I just got to tell you, the phone, at a time of tremendous turmoil and trouble, it does lift us up, right? I mean, it does give us confidence that we're doing the right thing. And I just talked earlier this evening to one of the young staff people who answers the phones in Washington, who was out of her mind the week of Betsy DeVos's nomination when the phones were just going crazy. But she said it was one of the best weeks of her entire life, right? Because she felt like she was part of something bigger. Second, remember, a lot of the press that are here, they call us and they ask, well, how many people called in favor? How many people called against? And so if you don't call because you assume that I'm already on your side, then it's going to look as if we're not responding to the sort of popular will because only the people who disagree with me call. So remember that that's still important. I would say to the extent you can link up with national organizations that do have reach into these Republican senators or Republican representatives' offices, that's really important, right? So finding one national group, whether it's the League of Conservation Voters or the Sierra Club or HRC, the Human Rights Campaign, whatever it is, invest in the national group that's fighting on one of these issues. And then just plow a lot of your work into local advocacy, right? So a lot of what is going to happen in Washington can be protected by sound leadership in Hartford and sound leadership at the local level. And we've had a really hard time convincing people with their busy lives to run for the town council or run for library board, to get involved in local governance. Well, now is the time to take your efforts and to focus it on getting really passionate people elected and just participating at the local level. So yes, you've got to focus some of your advocacy, the majority of your advocacy, on us at the federal level. But remember, you can do a lot to counteract some of the bad things that are happening at the federal level if you are thinking smart at the local level. So that would be the beginning of my answer to your question. So go ahead.
Hi, I'm Hillary Grant from Action Together Connecticut. And just a little comment, I'm wondering about Jason Chavez's jealousy at your entrance, because in Utah things are going a little bit differently.
Yeah. I've been on the other side of this, so I know how
Probably
he feels.
not this bad. Probably not that bad.
No, that's true.
Okay, I'm going to read my statement or a question. With the recent confirmation of Scott Pruitt as head of the EPA, there's been an outcry by scientists and environmentalists. It's been suggested that the regulations put in place by President Obama will be revoked. The agency will be significantly downsized and regulations will return primarily to the state level. What are the most effective ways for the public to fight this reversal?
Boy, this is a huge, thank you for the question. So this is a huge topic, and frankly, it doesn't get much more important because there is this meteor heading to the Earth right now that is climate change, and the clock is ticking when it comes to our ability to stop the irreparable damage that can be done to our planet. Why? Because these greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide at the top of the list, that escape into the atmosphere, once they're there, they continue to cook, right, for decades and decades and decades. And the concentration is getting to the point at which if we don't radically change the trajectory of these emissions in the next 10 to 20 years, when my kids, who are today 8 and 5, are old enough to serve in the House of Representatives or the Senate or be a member of the Sierra Club, it might be too late. So if we don't protect the gains that we made and build on them in some way, shape, or form, we might not ever be able to reverse it. So that's why we were up all night protesting Pruitt's nomination, and that's why I have the beginning of a laundry list of actions that I think you all should take. First of all, as I said, invest in those national organizations. There are Republicans, believe it or not, there are Republicans who don't believe that climate change is a hoax, right? And they are picking their battles right now. They are deciding where they're going to take on Trump and where they're not, right? Investing in national groups who can go into those districts and make them pay if they don't take on Trump on this question of climate change is important. Second, think about the way that we can get corporate America to weigh in here, right? Think about how we changed the conversation on LGBT rights. It was in part because we got big corporations to recognize that they were in the wrong place when it came to how history was going to judge their actions. And we can do the same thing here by pressuring companies that you all buy things from, right? You're consumers. You have tremendous power to not just green their supply chains, but become advocates in Washington for the kind of policies that will save our planet. And then again, back to that earlier question, just double down on local participation. Connecticut alone can't stop the harm that would be done by the withdrawal of the Clean Power Plant rule. But if the state and every municipality, right, thought creatively about how to green your government, green public buildings, create incentives to green private buildings, you could protect, or at least you could make up for some of the damage that will be done. I will say this, there are some changes that we made under the Obama administration that are so baked in that they are going to be hard to reverse. Take, for instance, the auto emission standards. So the auto emission standards, which are making our cars and our trucks 40% more fuel efficient, radically changing the trajectory of greenhouse gas emissions. They are so baked into the way in which we make cars today that the auto industry itself doesn't want those unwound. So there are some things that Trump can do, there are some things he can't do, and even if there is damage to be done, the work that you can do on advocacy and on local change can make a huge, huge difference. All right, I'm going to shorten my answers to questions here so we can get through people here.
Senator Murphy, my name is Davita Foy Crabtree. I'm a United Church of Christ retired minister, and I'm from Windsor. I want to ask you about Standing Rock. I am powerfully concerned. I am powerfully concerned about our treatment of our First Nations brothers and sisters and those who stand with them. I'm going to march on March 10th in Washington because I feel so strongly that they should not be marching alone. I want to ask you what kind of leverage we can possibly muster against this tragic situation there, but also in many other places around the country where what I would call savage capitalism is just tearing up the earth and operating by the most racist, heinous principles.
Yeah. Well, thank you for your. Yeah. Thank you for your willingness to speak truth to power on this issue. Yeah, so listen, I mean, the Trump administration has telegraphed where he's going to be put into the EPA, one of the best friends of the fossil fuel industry. He nominated a oil and gas executive to be the face of American foreign policy, and he has very quickly tried to reverse the Obama administration's decisions on pipelines coming in and out of the United States. This is one in which I don't have a great answer, right? Because when it comes to the regulatory approvals of pipelines, there's not a role for Congress to play on overturning these decisions without Democratic control of the House and the Senate. And so I would just go back to my initial answer. I do think that this protest movement that has erupted all over the country on a host of issues is really making Republicans nervous. And so I would just encourage you to continue to engage in peaceful civil protest. Many of us are going to continue to tell the story about what damage will be done to this country's economy if we continue to rely simply on fossil fuels in order to power it, right? We can make this argument from so many different perspectives about why we shouldn't just be concentrating on bringing gas and oil pipelines into the United States. There's millions of jobs to be had in renewable energy. Some country is going to capture all of the solar and the wind and the geothermal jobs that are going to be created in this world over the next 20 to 30 years, and right now it will not be the United States, because all we can think about is the handful of super short-term jobs that get created to build a pipeline that permanently will then employ about 10 people, whereas a factory making wind turbines or fuel cells will provide good-paying jobs to thousands of people for decades. And so we can fight this fight on economic grounds, on moral grounds, on national security grounds.
Senator Murphy, I'm Ken Chi from Trinity College. Hopefully we can get a picture afterwards. So you had previously mentioned in 2012
Hold on,
that...
is that a phone right there?
Yeah.
All right, come on, here, let's get it done.
Yeah.
Come on, let's take a selfie.
Yeah,
You know-
let's do it, yeah.
Do you know how to take a selfie?
I do,
All right,
I
good.
do.
All right, here we go. All right, there we
Yes.
go. There we go. All right.
You had previously mentioned that in 2012 that energy reform is your holy grail. After the presidential election, we have a political environment of alternative facts, denial of climate change, and a glorified image of fossil fuels and so-called clean coal. Under such pressure, what are your concrete steps in chasing your holy grail of energy reform, funding and encouraging the growth of renewable energy industry under the incredible pressure coming from the current administration and the Republican-controlled House and Senate?
Yeah, thank you. It's sort of the same. I would probably give you the same answer to my last question, so I won't repeat myself. I will just say, again, we've got to think about building different kinds of political movements that we have in the past. When you're talking about an issue like climate change, there are some unlikely constituency groups that you can bring into the mix. Davida was just talking from the faith community's perspective, right? You have evangelical Christians, right, who are big believers in climate change. They see it as a moral crisis that's confronting the globe. You have national security experts who understand that the true story of Syria is wrapped up in climate change, right? It was a historic drought inside Syria that pushed all of these farmers away from the countryside, becoming more arid by the month, into the cities that created the conditions by which the overthrow began of the Assad regime. So you've got to put together unlikely groups of people to try to win this fight. I mentioned the outreach to the corporate community as well. So yeah, it is. I say it's the Holy Grail because it's a moral cause, it's an economic cause, and it's a national security cause. And you just got to think differently about how you can bring together different folks. So.
That are watching the live stream.
Ooh, all right. So these are people outside. All right. All right. I'm 15. Is there any way I can use my age to my advantage in being politically active in my community? This is from Megan, and that's a really wonderful question, Megan. So, okay, if Megan can hear me, first of all, you can probably knock on about 3 times as many doors as half the people in this room can. So use your age to just talk to as many voters as you can. And listen, I'm talking to you, Megan, as someone who started speaking out when I was a teenager. I was 15 or 16 years old, again, not because I had a family history in this, but because I just started realizing that there's enormous power in young people speaking out. And I say that for 2 reasons. I was the youngest member of the General Assembly in Hartford. I was the youngest United States Senator when I got elected. And I found that there's this amazing twofold advantage in being young. First, your opponents, the people on the other side, Megan, always take you for granted. They never think that you're old enough or wise enough or experienced enough to beat them. And so you sneak up on them, and that's, it's true. But second, there's a moral force that comes with speaking when you're young, right? Because it is unlikely, right? People are not used to seeing 15-year-olds going out and knocking on doors and advocating for a cause. And so when you do it, you get noticed in a way that you might not otherwise if you were twice as old or 3 times as old. And so you have this power of persuasion that you might not think you have, especially at a moment like this when you're speaking as someone who's going to inherit the nation and all of the mistakes that are being made today. So, it is never, ever too early to speak up. And Megan, you'll find that if you do, you will have much more power than a lot of adults tell you you have. So, all right, let's take one more. These are long questions. I'm going to reward the short question here. So let's see. What is the most effective way what's the most effective thing we can do to help save the Affordable Care Act? This is from Judy, all right? Remind Republicans the promise that they made, okay? This is what's working right now, is reminding Republicans what they said year after year. They told people that they were going to repeal the Affordable Care Act, but they were going to replace it with something that was better, okay? Well, it's pretty easy to measure, right, what is as good or better. Do 20 million people get to keep their health insurance? Are they paying more or less than they currently are out of pocket? Are the insurance protections still rescuing millions of Americans from medical bankruptcy? Are the benefits better or worse than you are getting today under the exchanges? Are costs overall in the healthcare system going up, or are they going down, right? You can measure whether what you are proposing is better or worse. And there's an office, the Congressional Budget Office, that will look at all of the plans they propose and will come out with an estimate. We'll say, this is how many people are going to lose health care. This is how much more they're going to pay. So we can judge every single one of the plans that they come up with. The Congressional Budget Office will tell us whether it's better or worse than what we have now. And just continue to, this makes them so uncomfortable, right? Because they went out on a limb saying that we're going to repeal it and replace it with something that's better because they were the dog that never thought they were going to actually catch the car, right? And so now they've caught the car and they're being held to account for the things that they said. Remind them that they made those promises, and then my hope is what happens is that they will come to the table with us in the end and say, you know what? Let's sit down and make repairs, right? Let's make fixes to it. Let's both acknowledge that this could be better, just like we did with Medicaid, with Medicare. We made major reforms to Medicare 18 times after it was passed because no major change to 1/6 of the American economy is perfect the first time that you get it. So I think if you just hold them to the promises that they made, the end result may be, and I'm not saying that it's better than 50-50, but it may be that we actually could sit down together and try to find ways to strengthen this thing. So, all right, go ahead.
Senator Murphy, thank you for all you've done so far. We hope that we can all help you do more. I'm a registered independent still. I don't know that I'll ever vote for a Republican again, and I'm happy to go door to door for you when we re-elect you again.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
I want to make a couple comments and one good question to follow on with others. I'm a proud supporter of Move On Act, NRDC, among others. Right now it feels like there are no checks and balances, extremely frustrated, as I'm sure others are. I feel like the Attorney Generals are the only check and balance, and that is why I support NRDC. Especially right now, I currently consider anybody involved with DAPL to be domestic terrorists. That deadline is tomorrow. I would like to know from you, what specifically will you do ASAP to protect the environment, because we're never going to get that back this time, especially the disgusting allowance to hunt on wildlife refuge land in Alaska, which will probably permeate the rest of the country if we allow it.
Thanks. So thanks for the question. Again, sort of referring back to some of the answers I've given before, remember, the current rules as they exist in the Senate require you to get 60 votes in order to pass anything that is not related to what we call the reconciliation of the budget. So the Republicans have the ability twice this year through a sort of contortion of the rules to be able to pass something that's budget related with 50 votes. And they're sort of telegraphing that they're going to do part of the repeal of the Affordable Care Act that way, arguable whether they can do it through reconciliation, and they're going to do a big trickle-down tax cut that way. But they can't change America's environmental laws with 50 votes, right? They need 60 votes for that, unless they change those rules as well. And so Well, today it doesn't feel like there's a lot of checks and balances because you only need 50 votes to confirm an appointee, and almost everything we've done so far has been about confirming nominees. Eventually, as the rules exist, they will need 60 votes in order to move a lot of these items. And so if they want to open up federal lands for drilling or for hunting, if they want to radically change the Clean Air Act or the Clean Water Act, they will need the support of Democrats. Now, that's not to say that every Democrat is of like mind on every environmental issue, but I don't know that there's a way to get to 60 votes on some of the worst things that they're proposing.
Thank you.
Yep.
Hi, Senator Murphy. Thank you very much for being here. You're making us all very proud for all the work that you're doing. My name is Diane Pryor. I'm from Milford, Connecticut, and shortly after the Women's March in D.C., which I attended with my sister, okay, sorry.
Speak up.
So shortly after the Women's March in D.C., I formed a small indivisible group, which has now grown to over 60 people, and we're there to act and ready to do what we need to do to help this country. It's very overwhelming. So everything that you're saying is helpful. My question tonight, though, is in reference to SJ Resolution 14 that nullifies the rule that individuals who are deemed mentally incapable of managing their own affairs could not possess or purchase a gun. And apparently that was ruled out of the resolution. So we're the state of Sandy Hook.
Yeah.
We lost 26 people, 20 of them children. The question that I have is, how did this happen? What can we do to fight? And I forgot my other question. How do we fight that? Because it happened on, I think, January 30th. So that's done. It happened when nobody was looking.
Yeah.
And I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I work in the field of mental health. This is not about discrimination. This is about safety. So what can we do?
Yeah, let me, so I know, and I think, let me just speak to your beginning point for a second. I know this does feel overwhelming right now. I mean, everybody who's here is here because, this is one of the outlets, right? This is one of the ways in which you participate. I don't want to sort of tread too far onto the political side here, but I am going to try to help solve some of that sentiment in the coming weeks. I'm going to try to sort of outline in a really organized way some tools for people to use, some recommendations on a weekly basis that I would make for advocates on how you can best use your voice. So just keep your ears out for some things that I may try to offer you. So yeah, let me just try to go through this quickly. This is a regulation that the Obama administration passed at the very end of last year. And what it said is that the Social Security Administration will take the names of individuals who have been deemed so mentally ill that they can't manage their own affairs, meaning the Social Security check is sent to a conservator. It would take those names and put them on the list of people who are prohibited from buying guns. They were basically required to do this by a law we passed after Virginia Tech, but they never did it. But because they did it at the very end of last year, it gave the Republicans the ability to use an arcane law called the Congressional Review Act that allows Congress to essentially cancel a regulation within 60 days by a majority vote of both houses. So because the Obama administration pushed through all these regulations at the last minute, it made it subject to this Congressional Review Act. That's what they did here. So it was a law that had not really even, a regulation that hadn't even really gone into effect yet. And they pushed through by majority votes in the House and the Senate a repeal of that law. Now it means that there are going to be tens of thousands of people who are seriously mentally ill who are now going to be able to buy a gun. It does make our country less safe, but it really is something that had never been put into effect. Again, it comes back to this one of these contortions of the rules they're using. The Congressional Review Act only requires 50 votes. But if they want to make any changes to underlying statutes, if they want to, for instance, do as the gun lobby wants them to do, legalize silencers or pass a national right to carry a concealed weapon, again, they need 60 votes to do those kind of things. So yes, this was devastating to see this regulation get repealed, but it had never gone into effect. It was done very late. I wish the Obama administration had done it years before, and we still have the ability to stop some of the much more damaging things that they could do on other gun laws.
Okay, thank you.
Senator, Peter Beaupre, Farmington Valley Indivisible, and founder of Democracy Unite. You spoke about the threats against our institutions and our norms a little bit, and to me that seems like that should be such a bipartisan issue. There should be a swelling up of people on both sides of the aisle, Republicans, Democrats, Independents, to help protect our Constitution, institutions, and norms. My question is, you spoke a little bit about Senator McCain and Senator Graham, but what's the general tenor in Congress? Are there Republicans who are concerned about the threats on those pillars of democracy, and are there arguments that you found are effective in getting them to be more concerned and getting them to fight for us?
There are, right? So this question about whether there are Republicans of goodwill who do understand the threat that's being presented. Maybe they don't agree with the sort of high stakes that I said at the beginning of this meeting, but there are Republicans, friends of mine that I talk to, that are very concerned about what's going on. And listen, it is not easy for a Republican to take on a president of their own party in the first 30 days. Don't assume that their silence today means that they will be forever silent. Don't assume that none of them understand the stakes that are presented. I would submit to you that you have seen a change in the way that they are thinking about this issue over Russia. At first, Richard Burr, the chairman of the Intelligence Committee, and I, again, don't think that the Intelligence Committee is the proper place to do this, but at first he said, we're going to have a very limited investigation. We're not going to consider Flynn's connections to Russia. That's outside of our jurisdiction, right? And today, Burr has announced that he's going to look into all of it, right? He is going to let the facts lead where they may, that he's not going to put arbitrary confines on his process. And again, I think that the reason for that is threefold, actually. There's always the risk of saying you're going to say three things, because then you have to remember them. That A, facts have changed, so Republicans have seen all of this drip, drip, drip of the allegations about the Trump operations connections to Russia. Two, there are Republicans who understand that this is serious, and you're seeing that play out in real time. And then three, they're responding to this. They're responding to good old-fashioned political action. So they haven't moved to the place that I think is sufficient, but you are seeing some early signs here. I don't want to predict that we're going to all be kumbaya, Republicans and Democrats fighting, the Trump administration on a daily basis, but I think this is a very uncomfortable moment for a lot of Republicans. There will be those that'll stick with him, but I wouldn't assume that what you see from them today, if the threats continue to mount, is what you'll see from them a month, 2 months, 6 months from now.
Hello, thank you for holding this town hall, Senator Murphy. My name is Erin Badillo. I live in the Danbury area, and I am a member of Action Together Connecticut. I'm also a first-generation immigrant. My grandparents fled Europe after the Holocaust and emigrated to Israel, and my father was lucky enough to come here in the 60s and establish his family, and I am living proof of the benefit that refugees and immigrants have in this country, and I'm living a beautiful life thanks to their welcome. So obviously, I and many other Americans are deeply concerned by Donald Trump's abuse of executive power, such as through his unconstitutional Muslim and refugee ban. Thank you again for so vigorously and clearly opposing this grossly un-American executive order and standing up for America's true values. So while I'm glad that the courts have temporarily blocked the Muslim ban, I'm afraid that another court will allow it to take effect. I, like the majority of Americans, oppose this ban and would hope you help stop it. Will you sign your name to legislation S-274 that would block implementation of the ban and prevent funding for it?
Great. I think S-274 is my bill. I don't know. I think that's mine. I think. So there's two bills. Dianne Feinstein has a bill. Dianne Feinstein has a bill that would immediately rescind the order. I have the piece of legislation that would block funding for it. That might be Feinstein's bill, but I'm supportive of hers. She's supportive of mine. I introduced that bill with the help of my amazing staff within days of the order being announced. Yes, listen, I am going to devote everything that I have to stopping this order from ever going into effect. He is reworking it as we speak. He's going to try to answer some of the court's concerns. But let me tell you, this is making this country less safe on an hourly basis. I don't need to convince you of the moral arguments against something that discriminates against people based on what religion they practice. But I was, as was referenced by the mayor, I was in Europe this weekend attending this international security conference, and we met with the Iraqi prime minister. And he looked at us and he said, "You are begging me to send my brothers and sisters, Iraqi soldiers, into Mosul to do battle with ISIS, your enemy and our enemy, to put their lives on the line and die at astronomical rates. And then at the same moment, you are telling those brave soldiers that they are too dangerous to enter the United States of America? How can I get people to fight, right? How can I get people to join with you if you are saying that everyone in my country that is standing shoulder to shoulder with America in the fight against extremism is an enemy, right? Never mind the fact that these terrorist recruiters are literally using this ban to recruit lone wolf attackers as we speak inside our country. You can argue this from a moral perspective, but we should also be arguing this every day from a national security perspective. And listen, as much as I love the rhetoric that John McCain and Lindsey Graham and others use, at some point they've got to vote against these hateful things, right? And John, as many of you know John, as much as we disagree, he's very close to me, but you know, there's got to be a moment where the rhetoric from some of these Republicans actually turn into votes. I have a piece of legislation on the floor that would stop this ban from going into effect, and we could join together as Republicans and Democrats if we chose to stop it.
Hi, my name's Elissa Johnson. I'm from New Fairfield, Connecticut. And I was very happy to hear some other questions about environmental concerns. And you've already addressed some of my concerns. I teach environmental science. Tomorrow morning, in less than 12 hours, I'm going to walk in there and my kids are going to be saying to me, is it going to be okay? Mm-hmm. Every day, you know, the stream protection rule overturned, the methane venting on public lands, the hunting in a national wildlife refuge that somebody before me asked about. I know that you have a very solid record in terms of voting on environmental issues, but from where I'm sitting, and I suspect from where some other people are sitting, it's really scary. And I need to know, what is the strategy? You know, you're telling me that that at some point there are some good Republicans in the administration or in the Congress, and that they're going to start kicking in and they're choosing their battles. I've seen several pretty low-hanging fruit battles go down already, you know? I mean, it's okay to dump mining debris into a stream and smother that ecosystem. It's okay to vent methane, which is a stronger greenhouse gas than CO2, on public lands. When are they going to choose to do the right thing? And if they don't, what's your strategy?
Yeah, thanks. So, again, I feel like I've tried to give this answer as many times as I can about the different ways that we can fight this. But I don't want this to be political, because this isn't a political rally, but you have to win elections, right? So we just need to be honest with ourselves, right? So your strategy is always going to be incomplete if you lose elections. And so we've got it. So as much as again, this is not a political rally here, but we are going to do everything we can. But the oil industry right now controls the House of Representatives, the United States Senate, and the White House, right? And so as smart as my strategy is, it can't obviate the fact that the Koch brothers and all of that massive money essentially bought themselves a Congress and a White House that will do what they want. And so I will stay up for as many nights as it takes. I will speak to as many rallies as I can. I will put together as many constituency organizations and coalitions as possible. But in the end, you have to get pro-environment people in charge of the United States Senate, of the House of Representatives, and the White House. And so if we really all care about these issues, we have to be thinking about elections. And I'm not supposed to be saying this in a government-sanctioned rally, but we got to be thinking about elections as much as we're thinking about policy. So I know that's not what you want to hear, but I'm going to try to give you as many creative ways to fight and win these battles now, but we got to think about what comes next as well.
Can I just follow up?
Yeah,
for
sure.
one thing?
Yeah.
Because I understand what you're saying with that, but I also watch, the other side right now take, I see us following rules and taking the high road. And I guess I want to know, when I watch them just say, okay, well, we'll just have a meeting without the other side.
Yeah.
We'll go ahead and vote without the other side. I mean,
yeah, listen. I know, but the rules. When you control the majority of the House and the Senate, the rules allow you to pass some things, not all things, but some things. So, we have boycotted meetings, right? We have held the Senate in session for the second longest period of time in the history of the United States Senate. We will do more. We will do more. We will do more of those things. I don't want to lie to you and tell you that there is some perfect strategy that can convince Republicans to care about the environment. I will fight it with everything that I can, but I got you. I got. Let's keep going here.
Hi, my name is Leah Greenlee. I live in New Britain. I'm here with Indivisible Farmington Valley. My husband is a Czech immigrant. He was under the Russian regime until he was almost 15 years old. He's been here since '99. We've been together almost 14 years. I've been a special educator for longer than we've been together.
Yay.
And he's held immigrant jobs which don't pay anything. We have not been able to afford the paperwork for him to become documented. There's no expedience to it, even if we could. And because of stupid mistakes that we've made, which many other people have made, it's not even all that accessible. We're looking at sanctuary cities here, and we're wondering if we should move there or wait until ICE is at our door. We feel like domestic refugees. We haven't slept in months. I sit bolt upright multiple times a night, and my stomach's a mess. What are you doing to preserve the integrity of these sanctuary cities, to make sure that there's food available to people who will be fleeing there, housing, jobs, or volunteer opportunities? Because while it makes me feel better to know there is a place to go, I still feel like a domestic refugee. And what are you doing to help people like us?
Well, thank you for your story. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. First of all, right, let's thank you for sharing your story. That's not easy. And then let's not give them their term, okay? Right? These are cities that are exercising compassionate common sense, right? They're not. They're right living in the right living in the shadows, right? With no pathway to become a citizen of this great nation. That's not much of a sanctuary, right? So let's not overhype what's happening in cities that have decided to compassionately treat immigrants, who have decided to prioritize the enforcement of laws against violent criminals and people who have real bad intentions over the roundup of folks who just have undocumented status. Again, I think that's one of the reasons why you all have to invest time at the local and the state level, right? There may be some hard decisions coming for the state and for local municipalities about what they do. Now, these proposals that Trump is talking about, they still need Congress to sign on. So Trump has some limited discretion when it comes to discretionary grants. But if he wants to condition the big funding sources for cities and states on the details of individual towns' law enforcement decisions, he needs Congress to pass those things. So we have a say in this, right? Our resistance does matter. But to the extent he does have some discretion, then having good state and local elected officials who are going to stand up and continue to support the rights of immigrants, that matters. So the worst of this cannot happen without Congress, and so my position matters and my fight matters, and good, compassionate local decision making, which you can have a big role in, that can protect folks as well. So
Well, he's overridden what judges have done already. So
Well, he
whether
hasn't.
he'll override what
He-
people are
he-
doing, I guess my real question is, what are you doing to preserve the integrity of the systems of these
Right.
cities to support people who may be fleeing there?
Well, I can talk to you a little bit after. I'm not exactly sure what you mean by. He has
Food
not.
supply, housing,
Yeah.
opportunities for people to work or to volunteer
Right.
to help provide the food that people will need.
Right. So I guess what I'm saying to you is that he can't condition the receipt of the big funds that cities run on, like CDBG or Title I education dollars, without Congress allowing him to do that, right? So we have some say over it. But he has not, I mean, so far, right, he has not overridden the judicial decision here. He has respected the decision. The Department of Homeland Security has canceled the enforcement of the order. He's trying to rewrite the order, and that will be contested in court, and if it doesn't hold up in court, then we will expect him to make the same decision. But and that would be a constitutional crisis. You ask what would engage Republicans here if let's say he proposed a new executive order, the court struck that down as well, and then he said he's putting it into effect anyway. That would trigger Republicans, right, to stand with Democrats. I'm convinced of that. So I think that is part of the answer to your question. I think that's part of the protection.
Senator Murphy, my name is Kristen Wiley. I'm here with Action Together Connecticut. I live in New Haven. As a woman, I value my right to make my own choices about my body and about whether and when to have children. I also value my right to be able to obtain a safe abortion should I need one, no matter where I live. Neil Gorsuch is an extreme nominee who has ruled against affordable contraceptive access and against a woman's right to choose. Will you help us ensure that any nominee to the Supreme Court commits to upholding my reproductive rights?
Great. All right, here's what we're going to do. We're going to take one from either side. I'm going to answer them together so we can get through more questions. So go ahead and do that one, then I'll answer the two together here. There's so many people. And
Hi,
so
my
little
name
time.
is Jessica. I am from Manchester Moves Forward, a huddle group of the Women's March in Central Connecticut. I just wanted to ask you, in our group, there's a lot of people who are concerned about a number of issues, but one of the things that we're looking for is strong leadership from our representatives, and especially among the Democratic Party. I think we are tired of hearing that we need to wait for change that doesn't come, and we're tired of being told that we need to compromise our principles in order to make the smallest of gains. So is there a plan for the Democratic Party to resist the Trump agenda and any oppressive agenda that comes out of the Republican Congress, including any sort of procedural slowdowns?
Great. So listen, this issue of protecting choice, protecting access to free and legal, safe and legal abortion, it's a personal one for my family, not just political. My wife, who many of you know, is a longtime president of Connecticut NARAL's board, and so we've worked on this issue together as a couple for a very, very long time. So my position on Gorsuch, I haven't sort of announced, my position. I don't think Senator Blumenthal has either, but my position is pretty clear. If he's going to bring his politics to the bench, then he's not going to get my support. And I'm very concerned from what I've read about Judge Gorsuch that he is ordering his judicial philosophy in a way that would allow him and others to bring their politics onto the bench. He seemed to have cherry-picked animosity for liberals that are using the court to do an end around of political processes, when in fact over the last 10 years it's been conservatives that have used the court to do an end around on political processes. His criticism, I'd urge you, if you don't know anything about the Chevron standard, to take a look at it, because if the Supreme Court ever overturned the Chevron decision, then you could potentially have a political free-for-all on that court. So believe me, this is going to be the center of the decision that I make on Gorsuch. It's a super important one, so I'm taking my time to get to the right place, but this will be the center of the decision I make. On this question of how we push back, listen, there is no compromise to be had on issues of fundamental values to this country, right? There's no compromise on whether or not this country is a home for people fleeing religious discrimination. There's no compromise on whether we support as a nation the free press able to do their job to hold politicians and public servants accountable. So listen, if we're talking about the best way in which we fund transportation in this country, yeah, there's compromise on that, right? But there are certain values where we are not going to compromise, and we will fight this until we win, or we will go down fighting. So that's all I can tell you. There are places where you can compromise, there are places where I will not. All right, I'll take two more here.
Hi, Senator. My name is Nancy Miller. I live in Mystic right now, but I'm a military spouse, so I am very appreciative to
Thank you for your service.
Well,
it's your service too.
I'm actually gonna. I don't need claps. My husband's the one on the boat, but I'll give him your applause. Actually, and I'm also with Action Together Connecticut. My question is actually a follow-up to Kristen's. Given Gorsuch, that's how you pronounce his name, Gorsuch is position, will you promise to filibuster his nominee?
Yeah. Okay, great. Go ahead. Take one over here and I'll answer them together.
Hi, my name is Mike Perret. I'm from South Windsor. First, I want to say thank you for your leadership on so many progressive issues. I think it's speak for everybody to say we're happy to have you as a representative. So there's a lot of issues, and I feel like we're fighting a lot of different fronts, but one area I've kind of heard fall off the map is related to racial justice. And Senator Sanders, throughout his campaign, highlighted the physical, political, legal, economic, and environmental violence faced by people of color on a daily basis before Trump even took office. Connecticut alone has one of the worst disparities on unemployment for Black and Latin and Hispanic people. So my question for you is, first, have you met with any of the Connecticut racial justice groups, such as Moral Monday Connecticut or Surge Hartford, to discuss their concerns? And secondly, what steps are you taking to ensure that racial justice and dismantling systemic racism remain a priority during a time where there is so much else going on?
Awesome. Great question. So simple answer to your question. So, I think that whatever decision we make on Gorsuch, he needs 60 votes in order to pass, right? So whatever you want to call it, right, a filibuster using the 60-vote rule of the Senate, every nominee to the Supreme Court that has passed has gotten 60 votes. And so we should require 60 votes of Gorsuch. So that's what Schumer has said, that's going to be our requirement. So this is a long one, right? But let me just give you a little sliver of the work that I do on racial justice. So the first place that racial injustice often rears its ugly head is in the educational system, is where Black children and Hispanic children are treated fundamentally different based on the color of their skin. In this state, we have achievement gaps that aren't getting better, they are festering. You have discipline gaps whereby a Black student who commits the same offense in school as a white student is twice as likely to get suspended or expelled, setting them on what we call a sort of pathway from school to prison. And so in the new elementary and secondary education law that replaced No Child Left Behind, I drafted the civil rights section of the bill that requires states, even as they get a lot more discretion under this new law, which is appropriate, to continue to track performance of minority kids, of disabled kids, of English language learner kids, and to the extent that they weren't measuring up, that they weren't hitting the standards that you set, to have turnaround plans for those kids. That was opposed by every Republican, that was opposed by some Democrats, but it was the portion that I spent a year and a half fighting for. So I work on a lot of these issues, but where I've spent most of my time is trying to require that schools pay attention to the outcomes for these kids, demand better results if they aren't measuring up, and specifically thinking about the way in which they treat kids that have misbehaved, to make sure that they're not sort of looking at Black kids and believing that they are a different kind of danger than white kids just because of the color of their skin. And those protections are in this bill. And states have to use them, but they're there. And there's a whole host of other conversations we have to have, but a lot of it starts there. So,
sorry, can I just ask one follow-up? real quick?
Yeah, I can't. We're not going to be able to do. This will be the last follow-up because I'm sorry we have such long lines.
All right, just the first question. Have you yet met with any of the racial justice groups in Connecticut?
I
or
don't know.
will
I
you?
can't tell you off the top of my head whether I met with those two that you've named, but I work with with ACLU, with NAACP, with lots of these groups. So I don't know if I've met with those specifically, but we work with a lot of them.
Hi, Senator Murphy. My name is Carrie Wojcik. I'm from Coventry. I know I don't need to convince you of this issue. I thank you for your work on mental health reform and signing Senator Feinstein's letter to Trump to keep committed to the opioid epidemic. This is a photograph of my brother Kyle. He suffered from bipolar disorder and addiction, and he passed away on May 14th. And my question to you is, are you worried about the future of the 21st Century Cures Act and the money that we've allocated for drug treatment with the future of healthcare kind of on the line?
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Thank you. Go ahead.
Christina Jackson from West Hartford. I'm with the Indivisible Connecticut group. I think we all know that Jason Chaffetz has basically said nothing to see here as far as Russia, and he's not doing any investigations, which is a dereliction of duty, in my opinion. But he is, however, he just sent a letter to Jeff Sessions asking to indict Brian Pagliano, the guy that was the IT person for Hillary. And if this all goes through, he's going to destroy this guy's life. And it's unconscionable. But my overall point is, I think it's great that people like you get out on Rachel Maddow and all the different shows and talk about the issues. Adam Schiff is out there a lot. Amy Klobuchar is out there a lot. We need more voices because it's all we really have right now. So I don't even know if I necessarily have a question, but I just wanted to say, go back and tell your friends in Congress that are on our side to be out there more, be on those shows more. They call Senator McCain, God bless him, Senator Green Room, because he's on Meet the Press all the time. We need more of you and Amy Klobuchar and Adam Schiff.
I'm the Morning Joe and Rachel Maddow love me because they always, so everybody, on Morning Joe, everybody wants the later slots because they don't want to get up as early, and everybody on Maddow wants the early part of the hour so they don't have to stay up as late. But I need the early slots on Morning Joe so I can go do TV, I can go home and get my kids to school, and I need the later slots in the evening so I can put my kids to bed and then go do these
I'll
these
forgive you for
shows.
not
And
going
so,
on Morning Joe.
No, that's why I say, like, I'm all in on this. I think you're right. I think we have to have a national voice here. I'm trying to recognize the moment that we're in. I think our party needs some of our newer, younger voices to stand up and display some leadership nationally. And so I am trying to do that. As you know, I mean, listen, my family is. My family's like every other family. My family, has a history of mental illness, and I know that we were able to tackle it because we had the resources, and God help us that we did, and we were lucky enough to find a pathway to cures and treatment. I spent the last 2 years of my life writing this Mental Health Reform Act that is going to bring additional care to millions of Americans. I am not worried about the funding in that bill because there's a bipartisan commitment behind the $1 billion in anti-opioid funding, but $1 billion doesn't do it, right? I mean, I know that sounds like a lot of money, but we had 750 people die of opioid deaths in Connecticut in 2015. We massively deployed Narcan all over the state. So every police department, almost every fire department has Narcan, and we used it at a record rate in 2016. And in 2016, 900 people died of opioid overdoses, right? Think of what that number would have been if we didn't have Narcan all over the state. So we are losing this fight, not winning this fight. And $1 billion split up over the entire country just doesn't do it. So I'm not worried that that money's not going to come. What I'm worried is that there'll be nothing more. And in a state that's really having trouble, right, just meeting our own budget obligations, the idea that we're not going to be plowing funding into this epidemic and building on the work that the state legislature has done to cut down on the pathways into the epidemic, that's what really scares me. So thank you. So there we go. Go ahead.
Hi, Susan from Milford, Connecticut.
Can you please address what you're doing or what Congress is doing about this disgusting conflict of interest, whether it's selling Nordstroms on Twitter or leaving all the countries on the Muslim list off because Trump has his hotels? And also, how can we as people get our hands on this stupid tax return?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Go ahead. Go
Hi,
ahead.
my name is Linda Sardilli. I'm from Farmington. Over the last few days, we've read of unofficial efforts by Trump's organization, insiders, negotiating a Ukrainian peace settlement that will likely end up terminating U.S. sanctions against Russia. As a member of the U.S. Senate Foreign Relations Committee, what is your view of non-governmental entities getting involved in such negotiations? And what can the Senate do to make sure the sanctions stay in place until Russia makes appropriate concessions?
Right, good question. So there are ways that this question of conflicts of interest, they are in the Constitution, right? You guys have sort of been learning about the emoluments clause. Senator Blumenthal actually is talking about maybe I don't want to let a cat out of the bag here. Senator Blumenthal is sort of leading the discussion we're having in the Senate about how to appropriately enforce the emoluments clause, and we think that there are ways in which we can hold this administration to account under the existing obligations of the U.S. Constitution. I have put in a piece of legislation with Senator Ron Wyden. We're the primary two co-sponsors of legislation that would require every presidential candidate and every president to release their tax returns. Republicans will tell you that they're in principle for that idea, but we still have yet to have a single one that signed on to our legislation. There is clearly something deeply, deeply disturbing in those tax returns. I'm beginning to think it is not that he just paid no taxes, and that it is actually something. I'm having a hard time explaining his positioning on Russia other than some relationship that we cannot see today. So we are going to continue to press this, and again, if I believe the committees that are already investigating these connections, they say they are going to follow the facts where they lead. They may end up leading to better understand the financial connections that clearly exist between Trump and the Russians. His sons have said as such. His sons have bragged that they have so much Russian money, it's hard to keep track of. And back to this Russia question, so I'll just quickly answer your question in this way. Congress can weigh in on this question of Russian sanctions. So there is legislation that Republicans and Democrats have introduced, I'm one of the co-sponsors, that would require congressional consent in order for any of the existing Russia sanctions to be withdrawn or rolled back. This, I think, is one of the most important things that Congress can do, because it would be a display, a show to the Trump administration that they don't have a blank check when it comes to cutting a new deal with Russia, because we don't trust what the motivations are. Congress needs to step in and say, if you want to roll back sanctions on Russia, then you have to come to us and explain why, right? And as a condition of explaining why, maybe we're going to make you shed a little light, right, on what this relationship really is all about. So we have Republican and Democrat support for that bill. Miraculously, Paul Ryan actually came out last week and said that he supports this bill. So it is very possible that we are going to get this legislation passed through Congress. Let me reverse. Let me not say very possible. Let me say possible. So, all right, here we go.
Hi, my name is Simon Levesque. I'm an environmental science major at UConn, and I just wanted to say I thought your summary of climate change was excellent. So thank you for that. So President Trump has actually called himself an environmentalist before. It's one of those alternative facts, because he also said he wants to dismantle the EPA. And I think that's in favor of the fossil fuel industries.
Right.
I just wanted to know how you and your colleagues plan to fight the control that fossil fuel corporations have on our Congress.
Great question. So go ahead.
Hi, my name's Nancy Burton. I'm sort of in transition between Meriden and Barkhamsted. First, I want to tell you I really appreciate your activism in Congress, and I want you to keep it up. I really appreciate that. And now I'm going to put you on the spot. It's really easy for us to all sit here and criticize the Republicans because they're giving us so much to work with. But the DNC's behavior in the primaries was despicable. And I think may have contributed to the outcome of the election. I know that you and every superdelegate in this state except one was committed to Hillary Clinton before the primaries happened. So I would like to know what you're going to do to make the DNC behave more ethically and be more responsive to the people.
Right. Okay, thanks. So listen, I just think for your question, we have to understand that these big oil companies, they control our political process right now because they have funded these big super PACs, because the Koch brothers, essentially run the Republican Party. And so, again, we've got to think about the way in which we structure activism on our side, right? I mean, how can we build an army of small dollar contributors that can stand up an equal political force to that of the Koch brothers? So I think we have to think about, I come back to this question of elections. We've got to think about building a political infrastructure that is built very differently than the oil industry and the Koch brothers build theirs, but is in the end equal in force. So I think that's a big, and it's what you're doing right now. I mean, you're literally doing that in real time, which is why I wake up every day optimistic, because I'm seeing what we have been begging for a long time. So here's my only sort of caution on the email leakage from the DNC. Remember who did that, right? So it was the Russians who hacked the DNC and then leaked the specific emails that would damage Hillary Clinton. They didn't leak any of the emails that would have damaged Bernie Sanders. They didn't leak any emails that would have helped her. They were trying to manipulate the process on behalf of to try to hurt Hillary Clinton. So by sort of citing the specific emails that the Russians leaked to you, I think it's a little unfair in the bigger picture. I mean, I am in favor of getting rid of superdelegates. So, I don't really, so long as I'm a superdelegate, I'm gonna vote for the candidate that I think is best. But I think it puts us all in a really awful position. If Connecticut had voted for Bernie Sanders and I had come out for Hillary Clinton, that would have been, kind of an untenable position.
But you
So I
took
think
the
we should
position
get,
before.
I think we should
before
get
the
rid of
primary.
superdelegates and just have, and just have every state, and get rid of caucuses too. Get rid of caucuses, which are undemocratic. We should be having primary. We should be having, every state should have a primary election where everybody can come out and cast a anonymous ballot. And those ballots should determine who each state's delegates support at the convention. I think it should be that simple.
Will you be working to get rid of the superdelegates?
Oh, I've already come out, I've already recommended that we get rid of them, so I'm publicly for getting rid of superdelegates.
Hi, my name is Ray Duquette. I'm from Weathersfield, your hometown.
Yeah.
It's not hyperbole, nor it is an exaggeration to say that our country is in crisis.
Speak right into the microphone.
It's my belief that a madman occupies the Oval Office. That's just my opinion, but I take comfort in the fact that many psychiatrists share that opinion. We had another president who was forced to resign because of a third-rate burglary against a political opponent. How much worse is it that a president would collude with a hostile foreign nation in order to affect our republic? Now, you have said that there are investigations that are going on right now. I also believe that they're going to bring evidence which we all expect they're going to bring. And if that is the case, will you support the impeachment of the president?
Okay.
Thank you, Senator Murphy. Throughout his campaign and during his initial few weeks as president, Trump has continued to express an America First posture and has planted the seed that our nation might be willing to walk away from our commitment to NATO, which has guaranteed the peace in Europe for more than 70 years. Does the Senate have any leverage to prevent that president from doing this? And what can you or others say to our European friends to allay their fears that America's about ready to turn their backs on it?
Well, this
Thank
was
you.
so this was the biggest, I think, as far as I can remember, the biggest delegation of Republicans and Democrats that went to the security conference this weekend. And we were there for that explicit purpose, to explain to the Europeans that Congress was going to do everything in our power to protect this alliance between the United States and Europe. And this idea of America first, it's patently ridiculous because we live in a global village today in which all of the most important problems that face our world can't be solved one country at a time, whether it be climate change or the threat of terrorism. None of this can be attacked one country at a time. And by the way, we also live in a world that is economically connected today, in which one country's decisions dominoes pretty quickly and affects everybody else. So if we don't make our economic decisions on a multilateral basis, then we are all at the victim of another nation's politics. And so we've just got to do a little sort of education in the current state of global affairs for this administration. We're going to try to speak as much as we can as a unified congressional voice. There are things that we can do to protect funding for NATO, right? President can't withdraw funding for NATO participation by himself, right? He'd have to do that with Congress. And so I feel good that we have a good bipartisan group that's supporting that. It would just be very, on the question of impeachment, it would be really irresponsible for me to invent hypotheticals about how I would vote on impeachment regarding facts that have yet to be determined.
That's why I invented it for you.
The standard is high, right? It's high crimes and misdemeanors, and my focus right now is on getting these investigations to the point where we can see the full scope of the alleged contacts between the Trump campaign and Russia to the extent they existed. And once we have those facts, then we'll all have to make judgments based upon it. So it's the best I can do for you right now.
Yep, my question is fairly simple. During the 2016 election, I believe we saw a large rise in a big progressive movement, as well as a push away from establishment politics. In what ways do you consider yourself more progressive than the Democratic establishment?
That's a good question. Go ahead.
Senator Murphy, I'd really like to thank you for all the work that you've done, and I know how important it is to get you reelected before the next presidential election, but I brought a sign with me.
What does that say? Put that down. Put that down.
And I hope you're definitely considering to do that.
Yeah. I do appreciate it. There was this report the other day that the White House was investigating me because they were worried about me running for president. I'm not running for president, so they don't have to worry. They don't have to worry about me. So
wait a minute. So my question though.
But I like that I'm on their radar screen.
I have a question.
Oh, you have a question. Sorry.
Yeah,
go ahead.
I just wanted to anyway. My question is that we lost President Obama's nomination to the Supreme Court, Merrick Garland, and I was reading the Federalist Papers, number 47, where James Madison talks about, the separation of the branches of government and keeping them separate. And I think we are one vote away from total tyranny because the Republicans control everything right now except the Supreme Court. I don't think it's enough for us to count on Mitch McConnell to not do the nuclear version of changing the vote totals. I want something more than that. I would like to have another march on Washington that 5 million people show up at instead of 1 million. I just think this is one of the most important things that's going to happen in my lifetime.
Yeah.
I have grandchildren that I'm concerned about having to live under this kind of situation. So I'm hoping that you can come up with something better than we just have to organize better. We've got to do something.
Yeah, no, I've tried to offer more, more suggestions than that. All I'm saying is that Trump is largely doing what he said he was going to do, right? So he's doing it in a more reckless, more ham-handed way, but he's largely doing what he said he was going to do. And so the reason that you haven't seen his approval ratings slip dramatically is because most people that voted for him are not terribly surprised by the things that he's doing, which is just a reminder that you have to win elections, right? And I can tell you, I can talk to you until I'm blue in the face about how we failed at that task, about how we didn't communicate effectively, right, our economic message, about how, we didn't plug in to the sense of hopelessness that a lot of people have, a feeling that their country has left them behind. So I'm trying to offer as many creative ways to organize, to resist, to build coalitions, to protect yourselves locally, so that we can try to stem the damage. But I just want to remind, folks that there are still a whole bunch of Americans who aren't ashamed of voting for him, and we've got to go out and rebuild faith in our sort of vision, in our values of the world, at the same time that we're trying to push back against all of this. On your question about sort of where I stand, I can probably give you a list, but I'll just, I'll take guns as a primary example. I mean, I know we have still failed in enacting federal change to our gun laws that are going to keep our country safer. But I have seen in a short period of time this issue change within the Democratic Party. It used to be that Democrats ran away universally in every swing state or state that sniffed of a swing state from the issue of trying to take on the NRA and the gun lobby. Today that has changed, right? When I went down to the floor for that filibuster, I had 40 United States senators from blue states, purple states, and red states joining me on that floor. I have been unafraid in taking on the gun lobby. I have been after them at every turn. I haven't hesitated to invoke the moral imperative of passing stronger gun laws to save lives, and I hope that I have brought the Democratic Party and some Republicans over to my side. So I guess I would give that as an example. So
Thank you,
okay, all right, we got to wrap up on the last ones.
This is a little bit different from what
Okay.
we've been talking about tonight.
sorry, guys,
but
for
I'm
staying
really
in line.
concerned about 45's consolidation of power. And one of the facts that I don't like is his control of the FCC and now the net neutrality changes. And how is that going to affect our internet?
Yeah.
Our viewing of television, of internet.
Yeah.
And the other thing is his change in the internet and the changes in that.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, great. Go ahead. Last one.
Hello. My name is Alistair Light. I'm a student at Central Connecticut State University. And over the years, as a psychology student and as someone who's been involved in the mental health system for many years, I've gone from concerns to, forgive my bluntness, disgusted on the lack of awareness and the government's willingness to turn a blind eye, with notable exceptions such as yourself, when it comes to mental illness. And I want to ask you, beyond your bill, how far are you willing to go for the needs of mental health in this country? And more importantly, how can myself and my colleagues help?
Oh, great, thank you for your question. Thank you. I just would, listen, the threats are limitless here. And when I talk about the threats to democracy, I would include attacks on the internet as part of that basket of threats. Because if you aren't plugged into this fight over net neutrality, you have to get plugged in. Because what the Trump administration is very quietly trying to do is allow for these big corporate conglomerates that control both access to the internet and the content that is produced in order to make you pay, right, to get access to the content that the big corporations are not producing, right? So what they are going to do is make you pay through the nose to get access to independent media, all right, and give you as a right of subscribership only access to the corporate content that they produce, right? And that, right, that is how free speech, that is how true dissent starts to get narrowed and winnowed. Now, we have had success in beating back these attempts in the past. Why? Because the folks that care most passionately about the internet tend to be the people who can use it the best in order to communicate with politicians that they have gotten crosswise with. So if anybody who remembers the acronyms SOPA and PIPA, they were efforts to try to clamp down on a free internet that Republicans were super excited about until they weren't, when an explosion of advocacy happened on Facebook and Twitter that just jammed up all of their offices and all of their social media accounts. And so this has kind of been, kind of a tertiary concern because, the executive order and the repeal of the healthcare law have been setting the internet on fire first. But we've got to, we've got to understand.
But this is going to affect every single person in their bills.
Every single person in their
Even
bills.
all those 45 voters in
You are
Ohio
listen.
and
You are
Michigan
talking to
and
the people
whatever.
here who you need to organize, and I will help as well. Thank you for being an advocate and telling your story here. Listen, I'll just sort of end here. So I talked about my personal interaction with mental illness, but here's my belief about this job. If you aren't spending part of your time in this job, what a gift this job is, right? I mean, I'm one generation removed from poverty, and I get to serve in the United States freaking Senate, right? Like unbelievable, and shame on me if I don't use this position in order to speak up for groups of people who have no lobbyist, right? Who have no political action committee. And people with mental illness in this country who have been treated as second-class citizens, right? Who have been stigmatized, told that it's their fault, right? That they are untreatable in a way that we would never consider those who are inflicted with physical illnesses, heart disease, hypertension, or creaky knees are. Shame on us that we have allowed for that world to persist. And so I work on this issue of mental illness every single day. I'm proud to have passed the most comprehensive mental health reform bill in Congress in a generation, not just because it matters to me personally, but if I'm not speaking up for you and your friends who are thriving and succeeding with mental illness, then what's the point of having this job? And I sort of get the feeling that you're all here for the same reason, right? Like you all have gifts, right? You all have gifts of being able to live in in a state with enormous opportunities for you. You're healthy enough to be able to walk here, to be able to drive here, enter this hall, sit down, get back up again, and walk out. You don't live under constant threat of your life being taken from you like millions and millions of people around this world. And you do understand the moment that we're in today, that if you don't speak up, right, for all of the people who may not have the ability to organize themselves, to attend a town hall, to be part of a grassroots organization, then why be here, right? That tweet that went viral about the history book that you read, and you thought to yourself, boy, what would I have done if I was alive back then, right? Well, you're alive right now, right? And what you do today is what you would have done back then, right? This is one of those moments. And so I just repeat the two things I said at the outset, and then I'm going to give the town hall back to the town of West Hartford. One, I stay awake at night worrying that this movement will dissipate, right? And yet I implore you to remember that there is nothing you feel today, no anxiety, no fear, no sadness, that cannot be cured by your continued political action. It is an absolute honor to get to represent you in the United States Senate. Thank you for being here tonight. Thank you, man.
See you November the 1st. Yeah, good.
Then we finally meet again. I hold your face soft in my hand. I'm so entranced by you. Every silent stare screams, I want you. You come to me on an endless summer night, just face to face, out of sight. And I feel your lips touch mine as we blend into the dawn. So I guess I'll plead insanity, 'cause I'm guilty in the first degree. And I would testify